Hi, coming to you this afternoon after a quick meeting with one of our citizens this morning where he took advantage of the 2 hours every 2 weeks that we have set aside for our citizens to follow up on his questions. What are you doing to manage growth? How in turn are we going to continue to move traffic? Please help me understand better. I'm so glad that he came in, but what we both recognized and talked about, I need to share a lot more information with you guys, and that's what we're doing right now. How are we managing growth? Well, when this council and mayor came in 2016, the first thing we recognized, we can't annex land at the pace that we had been. Since that time, there's been no major annexations in the city of Madison. That has slowed growth, or at least will, over the next few years. We also recognized, however, that our schools were already so crowded with no funding structure in place, we needed to figure something out. So working together with our superintendent, our school board, and supported by our city council, in the summer of 2017, we put together a growth impact committee to help us understand what growth looked like, and in turn, once we had that growth, what the schools would need to do, and what monies we might need to ask for in a property tax. The committee was led by Mike Potter, a former city councilman, and Dr. Terry Johnson, a former school board president. 12 members of our community served on that. The city, the schools gave them the data. They reported out at the end of that year, helped us understand what growth looked like in 3 different facets. And the middle one of those, controlled growth, is what we then gave to our school board and Superintendent Parker to put together their plan for infrastructure. They did an elementary school, a middle school, add on to the 2 high schools, and add in their safety and pre-K stuff. It came to 12 mills of a property tax that we would need to put in place to support our community. We worked with our legislators to get that on the ballot, but we also worked with our city council to put together a growth policy that we could use to say yes where we needed to say yes, no where we needed to say no, and as importantly, put together development agreements that could slow that growth when we said yes to continue to stretch it out as best we could to catch up once the schools, if passed with the property tax, would be able to use to build those schools. So once the growth policy was in place, in early this year, a developer came to us in Limestone County and had 2 different developments. He'd waited a year and a half to bring to us. Putting together a development agreement with our city, he agreed to only build about 25 units per year, agreed to 20% green space, and multiple other things that made a difference using that growth policy as a barometer. Those passed. During that same time, the Kaiser development that so many of you guys have heard about was being brought to us. We worked on a development agreement there, but when that was first brought to Planning Commission, the Planning Commission, looking at the growth policy, said you don't take industrial and turn it into residential unless it's significant benefit to the city, and they voted no. They didn't have a development agreement to use. So working with the developer, understanding that no, we worked over the next 3 to 4 months to put something in place that would have significant benefit to the city if, in turn, the property tax passed. During those same time frames, we started talking about impact fees. We recognized that it's something that a city can add, and our legal department started researching that. They came back and said, you can only do that if you have data that directly correlates with what it's going to impact the city and the schools on, and you can use that for police, for fire, for recreation, for infrastructure, but also for schools. One of the major infrastructure improvements that was approved by council, I think in July, was the 5-laning of Sullivan Street from basically the railroad tracks all the way down to Madison Boulevard. That added 3 traffic lights, one at Kaiser, one at West Dublin, and one at Royal. Royal was already connected to Westchester, and that's Westchester is where the bus depot is, where everybody goes every afternoon and every morning. We in turn, with this development agreement on Kaiser, asked the developer to connect Westchester to Kaiser, helping those buses to have another entrance and exit point with a traffic light once that is done. It also allows us to go through the new Sealy development in historic downtown Madison, cut across to where the new middle school will be, making that more safe and obviously making it a quicker journey to get down to that point. So that is significant benefit to the city, worth about $2 million of infrastructure that we simply don't have to make that connection ourselves. Now, another thing that we added was the connection of our Bradford Creek Greenway under the railroad tracks just south of Palmer Park all the way down to historic downtown Madison. In addition to that, it would get you to the new middle school. That again is worth about $2 million to the city, and it follows what we said, the community said in 2012 that was critical to us when we did our growth plan, which was more connectivity and more green space. So significant benefit to the city is about $4 million worth of infrastructure that the developer will be responsible to pay for. Also, we listened to the airport because each of those units has to be soundproofed. We also listened in the sense that we will only allow 50 units per year, and they have to stop at year 4 if they don't have the infrastructure taken care of. There's no playground on that, there's no second stories, and so in trying to make sure we minimize the impact to our schools, we in turn have great development that's going to add a lot of newness to historic downtown Madison, but also listens to what we're trying to do, which is control and spread out growth. So last Monday we approved our 2019-2020 budget. There's 2 pieces in that budget that directly correlate with managing growth. The first one is about a $100,000 study on what impact fees we should put in place based on factual data. That will start in about the next 2 weeks. It takes about 3 to 4 months to take care of. When that's done, we will be able to take that data and go to the state legislators because they have to put something on and through next spring so we can add the schools in that. The city is committed to understanding that you got to pay to play when you come back into Madison from this point forward. And all 3 of the development agreements that we put in place, the 2 in Limestone County and Kaiser, have retro pieces in it. So if we put an impact fee in place, all of those units would include the impact fee with them. And secondly, Cliff Farm. Up on Highway 72, it's an ideal opportunity that you've heard might come into the city. Right now it's in the county. We've invested about $50,000. So when they bring us the overall master plan for all of that, both commercial, retail, and residential, we as a city will do an impact study on what that would mean positively and or negatively to our city. It's no guarantee that he'll bring that into the city, and it's no guarantee that that study will say it makes sense for us to have it in our city. But that's factual data that we'll use to make good decisions and in turn figure out what's good and bad is when it comes to growth. So I think one of the things that I recognized this morning was the perception might have been you passed a property tax, which meant we had the schools, but why in the world are we adding more units? As you guys can now see, we added the units only after the property tax passed, and the significant benefit to the city was greater knowing where our middle school was going to be put. A couple of other quick points I want to make. Guys, we love our city, and others who are coming here, 30,000 jobs over the next few years, look at it and love it too. Ranked number 1 in the state of Alabama from a city standpoint when it comes to the best suburb to live in, quality of life, and I could go on and on. Tie that together with the number 2 school system in the state. People want to live here if they value quality of life and they like education. They're finding ways into our city. We know we're going to grow. What we have to do is control it and manage it. And secondly, I can tell you that the growth policy has allowed us as a city multiple times to say no. Developers have come to us before and then after the property tax and said, hey, we're ready to build a lot more, annex in. It's not going to happen. We understand we can't make everybody happy. But what we are doing is managing and controlling growth. We're using development agreements to stretch out that growth 5, 7, 8 years. We're using a property tax that you approved that our school board will now have the capability of going to build because those schools are why most of us come to this area. So as I close, thank you for your time. Please know that we will work hard to get this information out on all of the city's social media platforms. And as importantly, come see me. We have 2 hours every 2 weeks set aside just to sit down like that gentleman did this morning to be able to share the information. I felt better when he left, but knew we needed to do this more often, and we will. Thanks.